closing remarks. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Secretary General Cecilia Akintomide to come and make the opening remarks.
Executive Directors, dear colleagues, in particular Steve and co, thank you very much for this honor of participating in the launch of this flagship African Development Report 2014, which focuses on regional integration for inclusive growth. You will all agree with me that the report is timely. It is published in the second year of implementation of the Bank Group 10-year strategy, which is designed to improve the quality of Africa's growth through the twin objectives of inclusive growth and transitioning to green growth. We will also recall that one of the 5 main channels for the Bank Group to achieve these objectives is regional economic integration. We're also launching this report as part of the 50-year anniversary celebration of the African Development Bank, and the subject of integration remains relevant and even more so as it was at the time of the bank's creation. Finally, and on a sadder note, we have seen the effect of lack of regionally integrated systems with the spread of the Ebola virus disease. While structures, rules, and regulations are able to impede economic progress, the same barriers are unable to stop the spread of the disease, reminding us that there is more that socially integrates than separates us. I believe that every person in this room, particularly every employee of the AFDB, feels a sense of urgency about Africa's development. We may be celebrating Africa Rising, and for good reason. We, however, should have risen many years ago and sustained it. We therefore need to make up for lost time. Accordingly, development as a goal is not enough. We need to increase its space, improve its quality, and sustain it. It is for this reason that regional integration, like infrastructure, private sector development, as well as gender, to name a few, is critical. These are our superhighways. Okay, I know I said super, but these are our superhighways for Africa's development. In a context in which time is of the essence, this report causes us to focus and points us in the right direction. It highlights that regional integration has been a central aspiration of African countries for the last 50 years, with treaties and other decisions reflecting the political will, going as far back as the OAU Charter in 1963, and the relatively more recent Abuja Treaty and the New Partnership for Africa's Development. The political will is not necessarily the challenge, but it's the implementation. It is for this reason that this report and the work we are doing at AFDB is important as we focus on this critical next level of implementation. So as we implement a regional integration policy, strategies, and projects, and take a regional approach to developing solutions, we should keep in mind that Africans as a people are advancing at a faster pace than the continent. If we do not create the environment to harness this human capital, we will lose them and their talent to greener pastures. The report tells us that 1 in every 9 African with a university degree resides in an OECD country. This skills exodus is one of the largest in the world. Africa has the highest percentage of landlocked countries than any other continent, 25%. Our domestic markets remain relatively small and fragmented, limiting the ability to benefit from the opportunities provided by global or even regional value chains. Though Africa is the second largest continent, its colonial legacy has resulted in fragmentation, geographically large nation states, relatively small populations, and long distances between population centers. The report reminds us that the continent's land area is larger than that of China, the United States, India, Japan, and Europe combined, but its population is only about a quarter of their total and its economy a fraction. Our onerous visa restrictions for fellow Africans are hindering trade as well as the inflow of skills and expertise. More African countries need to follow the example of Rwanda. In addition, intra-African traders continue to be faced with significant tariff and non-tariff barriers such as quantity, quota, and seasonal restrictions that increase their costs and obstruct their business. We are also making criminals of some of our brightest and the best through our policies, rules, and regulations, which turn what should be transparent and legitimate into a fraudulent business. Placing a premium on goods and services and risking lives with a high potential for resources to be used to finance terrorism. There is, however, some good news. The value of formal intra-African trade has increased almost fivefold between 2001 and 2012, though its relative share still remains constant at 12%. This is low compared to 17% for Asia's developing economies and 60% for the European Union countries. More good news. Intra-African Greenfield FDI projects as a percentage of Greenfield inflows into Africa tripled over the same period from 7% to over 21%, with firms in South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria accounting for nearly 60% of project outflows into Africa. Increasing the pace of regional integration will require continued strengthening of the regional economic communities and other institutions, speeding up the development of regional infrastructure for the free flow of goods, services, and skills through innovative financing mechanisms and ownership structures. Regional standardization of curricula and degrees at university level and clear procedures for non-citizen or non-local graduate employment. Financial integration to facilitate the flow of money and financial services, and the regulatory environment that creates and sustains the free flow of goods, services, and persons. Quoting President Kaberuka, this report is recommended to all individuals and groups interested in the challenges and opportunities of Africa's regional economic integration. The report takes a broader view than previous analysis, looking especially at how regional integration can ensure that Africa's recent growth is sustained and inclusive. I look forward to the exciting panel deliberations and the concluding remarks later this morning. I also take this opportunity to congratulate Steve, Sylvain, Mono, and all others who played a role in producing this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. In some ways, I'm quite glad I no longer live in that place called the United Kingdom, because in the olden days, I would have known that from here, I would have just been taken to the tower. The reason being I forgot to acknowledge the executive directors and the vice president. So maybe there are some advantages to living in Africa. And now, without further ado, I'd like to call upon the man of the moment, I suppose is the best way of putting it, the man who's in charge of this document. And if you don't like it, don't throw anything at me. You can throw it at him, you see. So without further ado, Steve Kayizimugera, please come and tell us about the report.
Maybe I should begin by saying Your Excellencies, in case some skipped in. And maybe I should also add Your Excellencies, current and future, in case you become one Excellency, Joel. Thank you so much for your introductions, and thank you so much, Cecilia, for a very impressive presentation, I thought. And that shows you that you're a multifaceted person indeed. You sounded very much like an economist anytime. So thank you so much. What I'm going to do very quickly, because really the big thing is for us to transition to the panel. So what I'm going to do is very quickly go through some of the major themes that have arisen in our African Economic Report 2014. But before I do that, you see, these reports are written, and we present them, and sometimes enjoy them. We have a bit of coffee, and then move on. But there's an incredible lot of work behind, a lot of collaboration, a lot of fights behind the scenes to get to the level where we are. So I would like to thank the teams that worked on this, the teams in the research department, the teams in statistics, the teams obviously in the honorary department, Mono, the chief of the trade division, and so on and so forth. We use a whole lot of people. We had a lot of people out there who helped us look through documents. We had people help us with the editing. So everybody that contributed, we thank you so much indeed. So let me do this. Instead of going through a whole lot of the whole report, which you have, I need some help with this. How do I roll this? I do that. Does that do it? Yeah. Maybe it was the slide is, oh, okay, is that, yeah, okay. Then okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we got it. So I won't go through the rationale and all this. Let me just go to the messages, really, and I want to do it in about 5 minutes, very quickly. And then I invite you to read the report very, very carefully. It really has a lot of interesting messages in there. It will keep you going for quite some time. It's a bit of a Christmas present for you if you run out of all the novels that you'll be given in Christmas presents. So the first message there, important one of that, is, oops, sorry, okay. So the first message is inclusive regional infrastructure. And the thing we are saying is that we are building a lot of infrastructure right now from the region where I was born and raised. We are trying to build, or the governments are trying to build, a railway line all the way from Mombasa, deep into Kampala, and all the way to Kigali. Okay? So if it's just a matter of connecting people and bringing in goods and services, well and good. But you also need to, it should not just be a conduit to the sea. It should have impact on the people and the communities through which it passes. So that's some thinking that is very important. And also very important that this kind of infrastructure connects countries like Rwanda that are completely landlocked, in fact, doubly landlocked. It's landlocked in the sense of Uganda next door, and then, of course, Kenya. So that is the main message, that infrastructure should have things, that just not moving people from A to B, but should also be able to provide livelihoods for communities around where the infrastructure has been built. And then, again, quickly, managing regional migration. And this is something that is coming up more and more and more. You know that a whole lot of our young people are moving today, not necessarily to run away from political problems at home, not necessarily as refugees, but because they are looking for new livelihoods. A lot of them are looking, because populations in some countries are expanding out of all proportions. But one thing we have are opportunities next door. In a whole lot of countries, there might be a shortage of doctors. There might be a shortage of teachers. There might be a shortage of engineers. We have all of these within Africa. One thing that is missing is appropriate mechanisms for moving people about. Visas are a very, very big problem in Africa. Even next door, neighbors don't allow people to move as well as they would want to. One very encouraging example is what we have in East Africa, where as a As a citizen, you could get a card which moves you through 5 countries without having a visa. And also tourists can come in and with one visa could move around in 5 countries. This has had a very positive impact on not only incomes from tourism, but also business people and families as well. So again, that is some illustration on the visa situation, which is East Africa is doing quite well, actually better than world average, but others still have those kind of impediments. Okay, and then again, very quickly, on the third message, and the big one of that is regional financial integration. Systems, we have a bit of money in countries, but this money is not moving around because of all sorts of impediments, stock exchanges that don't work very well, and also innovations that haven't quite brought to bear that well. So again, one message is that we can use financial integration. I see that the systems keep on. Let me just go briefly back to financial integration. So what we need though is, I think these kind of things, financial integration and so on, don't just happen. You need governments to come together. We need to think through regulations, supervision frameworks and so on. A big challenge that has come again in East Africa is mobile money, mobile banking, and M-Pesa system, which is now allowing the flows of money around communities in these regions to the extent that 50% of this money just goes around in M-Pesa. And this has fundamental impacts on what central banks can do in terms of monetary policy, in terms of control of inflation. So there's a whole lot of thinking that we need to be doing today to sort of capture and benefit, leverage some of the opportunities coming out of regional financial integration. Okay, so okay, and then of course a topic on which maybe we'll talk a little bit about is also boosting Africa's value chains. Most of you know about this is a buzzword, value chains, but what is it? What it really means is that it's no longer feasible to to be working towards exporting a car. That would be a waste of energies. What you want to do is to focus on a particular aspect where you think you have comparative advantage. Would it be the tires of that car? Would it be the wheel systems? Would it be the computer systems and so on? And all these things are made in separate parts of the world and then brought together and assembled. Maybe your comparative advantage is the assembling part. So there's a whole lot of things happening within Africa, but not as much as we would want to. And one thing that we want to encourage, and we talk about very much in this report, is maybe do the smaller things at a regional level. I just came through Ghana, a country that I quite like. Well, I like a lot of countries. But one thing that you notice at the airport is all the chocolate. There's a whole lot of chocolate, a lot of it. And Swiss chocolate, Swedish chocolate, Dutch chocolate, but no Ghanaian chocolate. And when all these things, all the chocolate is actually, the bulk of it comes from this region. So you begin to wonder, why don't we begin with some kind of regional value chains? Really, the technology of chocolate, whatever they tell you, doesn't seem to be very complicated. So we can copy this. So, and lastly, I'm sorry about the technology. It's not quite user-friendly, I must say. But I was hoping I would just sort of go through that way. And then the bank's role. If I say thank you, let me say a bit about the bank's role. I think our report does definitely say quite a bit about where the bank is right now at the center of Africa's transformation. And one of the drivers, as ever before, is going to be to get regional integration going in various ways, in terms of the political talking to each other, in terms of supporting the coalitions of the willing, in terms of going out to support the regional communities, in terms of going back to think that regional integration is actually not going to happen at the regional level if the national governments are not supportive of it. So very much a very interesting topic, very many topics in there, but the thrust is that without regional integration, without the economies of scale, without the competitive edge that regional integration brings to all of us, without the big markets that this will bring, we probably will not be making much by way of trying to transform Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, about 8 minutes, that is really the main thrust and the messages coming out of this report. And I really urge you to read it carefully. We're always going to be there to try to respond to the issues at hand. And then I think, if you allow me, you want to say a few things before we transition? Yeah, go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, Steve. Before we'll now go on to the next section, which is the panel, but just in just a couple of points. One is that, of course, you've heard, for all of you, this is the Christmas reading. You know, please don't have any novels or whatever, but this should be your key document, and I'm going to try and test you on all of this when we come back from the Christmas holidays. And the second point is that, of course, we've now learned that you know, our acting chief economist spends his time in duty-free shops looking at chocolate. Without further ado, can I now invite the panel that will now sort of take up, which is, of course, Steve, and then, of course, Sylvain, Maliko, and, you know, Edie Msa. Where is he? Yeah, Edie. And Edie O'Neill, and of course the Dean, last but by no means least, the Dean of the board, Dr. Yahaya. That's it, sir. I'll now hand over, yes sir. I'll now hand over to Steve, who's going to moderate this part of the proceedings, and I'll return after he's done so. All right, thanks, Steve.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming in such large numbers. Let me do this. Let me try to introduce the panel. You know many of these faces. I've dug up a bit of information here and there, which you might find of interest. Nothing. Don't be frightened, Dominique, please. Very friendly information that I've. But let me first of all say this, that I did not request the panel to necessarily go through the intricacies of the points that we raised, the main messages and so on, but to sort of take the whole challenge of regional integration, regional economic integration, and put it, you know, prioritize, put it in your own words. What are the challenges out there? And then, of course, to bring in a bit of differentiation, we sort of wanted to ask a few things. So I will indicate what each will say, or they will tell you what they are going to say as we go along. But let me try to introduce them. And please, if I have missed, my research is faulty, don't throw any stones here. I hope there are no instruments you can throw at me. But beginning with, in alphabetical order, Sylvain Maliko, very welcome. He's the acting director of the NEPAD Regional Integration and Trade Department. You're very welcome here. Before coming to the bank, he was Minister of Economy, Planning, and International Cooperation of the Central African Republic. I don't know if many of you knew that. So a very important man indeed. I won't tell you about some of the discussions that I've found out that he undertook, the fights that he had with some people in that government to straighten out things. You're extremely welcome. And he will tell us a little bit about the role of the bank in fostering regional integration, some of the challenges and some of the prospects. And then very quickly to Mr. Abdallah Musa, who is, besides being an extremely good friend of mine, loves Comoros. As a native of Comoros, I do love it, having visited a couple of times. It's so far away from anywhere that you don't quite know if you get there, but you get there and you find a very lovely place indeed. He was head of research and at the economic research at the Economic Commission of the African Union, and he is really steeped into how a lot of these issues. I looked at your constituency. You have 9 countries, small ones and big ones. But I then looked at if you wanted, for some reason, to visit your constituency from Cape Verde to Comoros, obviously you have to go through Paris. You would need to travel 10,000 kilometers to do so. So it just tells you the kind of problems he has just getting his constituency together. So, and then of course, Dominique O'Neill, thank you for accepting this. I know you are a very busy man indeed. But as I said, looked through his background, very impressive indeed. He's been a DFID head. DFID is the corporation arm of the United Kingdom. And he's been the head of DFID in Nepal, head of DFID in Sierra Leone, head of DFID in Yemen, places that are quite interesting, I must say, and where he did a lot of good work. One thing that he did in Yemen is learn Arabic, understand classic Arabic. So I don't know what that means. You can't use it in Tunisia, I suppose, or you can. Okay, but in any case, you're very welcome indeed. So you can see we have a whole range of experiences here. And finally, Sheku Yahaya, who is the dean of the board. He is an academic in his own right, or used to be. He was for a long time working at Ahmadu Bello University. We sort of share people who worked in that university, colleagues that worked in that university together. And of course, he represents the biggest shareholder of the bank at the ADB. You're all very welcome. So now again, going back to Sylvain Maliko, what can you tell us briefly, in about 4 minutes, about the issue that we gave to you? In other words, what do you think, how are we doing in terms of fostering regional integration? What are some of the challenges, and what are some of the prospects looking ahead?
Bien, merci Steve. Je pense, vous l'avez dit, la vice-présidente l'a indiqué aussi dans son discours d'ouverture, c'est un travail collectif, parce que la banque a une priorité particulière qui est celle de l'intégration régionale. Comment soutenir le processus de l'intégration régionale. Je voudrais rappeler quelques statistiques qui permettent de fixer l'opinion sur ce que la banque a eu à faire au cours de ses 50 années d'existence, mais surtout particulièrement au cours de ces 10 dernières années. La banque a financé environ 70 opérations au cours de ces 10 dernières années pour environ 7 milliards de dollars US. Et ces 70 opérations ont couvert le secteur des transports, les télécommunications, l'énergie et l'agriculture. Mais il y a également eu des opérations importantes dans le domaine de l'eau. Je pense que ces opérations sont clairement identifiées dans le programme que l'Union africaine a retenu pour soutenir la mise en œuvre du NEPAD. Et cela n'est pas hasardeux. Parce que sans l'essentiel de ces infrastructures, parce qu'on parle des infrastructures, l'Afrique aura du mal à négocier le tournant et à envisager sa transformation structurelle. Et c'est là où, je pense, se situe l'essentiel des préoccupations de l'Afrique, parce que l'Afrique ambitionne d'être un acteur important dans l'économie mondiale, du fait de ces dotations naturelles qui sont particulièrement importantes, mais également du fait qu'elle ne tire pas suffisamment bénéfice de ces ressources pour, disons, répondre à des besoins qui sont spécifiques aux Africains. De ce point de vue, je pense que la question des infrastructures aussi correspond à des analyses, aux conclusions de certaines analyses qui ont été menées et qui ont donné lieu dans certains espaces, sinon au niveau de certains continents, à des taux de croissance particulièrement élevés. Mon avis, qui est celui partagé par beaucoup d'autres, ou que je partage avec beaucoup d'autres, c'est que le continent a besoin des niveaux de croissance particulièrement élevés sur une longue période pour rattraper son retard par rapport à beaucoup d'autres continents et répondre aux besoins des Africains. Les taux de croissance de 5, 6, 7% ne seront pas suffisants aussi longtemps que nous verrons la pression démographique croître. Parce que l'Afrique, comme il a été indiqué, est l'un des continents où la dynamique démographique est la plus élevée, la plus forte, et donc, bien évidemment, ça entraîne des besoins et des pressions beaucoup plus fortes sur les productions ou les valeurs qui sont créées par le continent. Et donc, je pense que du point de vue du rôle de la banque, parce que c'est là où nous nous situons, la banque a déjà indiqué ses grandes ambitions dans le cadre de la stratégie des 10 dernières années. Nous avons récemment adopté la politique et la stratégie d'intégration régionale qui donne quelques orientations. Ce qu'il convient de retenir, c'est que nous sommes sur un continent qui est constitué de 54 États et de 8 communautés économiques ou assimilées régionales. Et donc, quand on regarde à l'intérieur de ces différents espaces régionaux et qu'on les compare à d'autres, c'est un peu le rôle que le département s'est mis en tête de faire, c'est de créer des indicateurs d'intégration régionale qui permettent de mesurer le rythme d'intégration au niveau des régions et de les comparer à d'autres. On constatera de manière empirique que ces espaces économiques régionaux n'ont pas le même rythme d'intégration, ce qui crée déjà quelques distorsions par rapport à la dynamique d'ensemble qu'on veut créer. Deuxièmement, lorsque on regarde les dotations en ressources naturelles dans les différentes régions, on constate que certaines régions qui sont fortement dotées sont des régions qui sont les plus fragilisées par un certain nombre de crises qui sont de nature, je dirais, soit politique ou sociale. Et troisièmement, dans les facteurs qui retardent d'une certaine manière le processus de l'intégration, il faut voir la capacité des communautés économiques régionales à encadrer le processus d'intégration. Donc, si on met en perspective tous ces facteurs et beaucoup d'autres que je ne vais pas citer parce que le temps est court, je pense que la banque, du fait de l'identification de 3 piliers, c'est-à-dire d'un côté tout ce qui concerne les infrastructures en tant que telles, de l'autre tout ce qui va avec les services qui sont associés à ces infrastructures et le processus de transformation des produits, des matières premières avec des valeurs ajoutées beaucoup plus importantes, et enfin le troisième pilier qui est celui du soutien aux structures d'intégration régionale. Je pense que tout ça mis ensemble caractérise fondamentalement le rôle que la banque entend jouer. Et de ce point de vue, je pense que les acquis peuvent être renforcés si on arrive sur une période relativement raisonnable à mettre en œuvre cette stratégie. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you. Well, I'm saying thank you on your behalf. Okay, so Idi Musa. By the way, you might be wondering why we have quite a number of EDs out here. I should explain. Partly because you've been asking for a seminar on. We said why not use this as an opportunity, also to test your sort of flexibility in maneuvering around these issues. Okay, you have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président et le Vice-président. Je ne vais pas d'abord parler de l'intégration régionale au sens où vous avez introduit le sujet. J'étais à l'Union africaine, j'étais parmi les principaux responsables qui ont élaboré le programme minimum d'intégration régionale. J'ai assez parcouru le continent, je connais les CER tels qu'ils fonctionnent, les insuffisances, mais aussi les atouts dont ils disposent. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler d'un autre sujet. C'est la place qui devrait être donnée aux îles africaines dans le processus d'intégration. Comme l'a si bien dit Monsieur le Vice-président, je suis administrateur qui représente le Cap-Vert, mais aussi les Comores. C'est à peu près 15 000 km de distance. C'est vous montrer toute la complicité et toute la difficulté d'abord à parcourir ces pays, à pouvoir travailler avec eux. D'autre part, les îles compte tenu de la taille, compte tenu de la fragmentation, compte tenu du poids économique qui n'est pas toujours assez fort, ne sont pas bien intégrés ou on ne prend pas toujours leurs besoins dans les programmes d'intégration régionale. Le directeur vient de nous parler de 8 CER. Toutes les îles africaines appartiennent ou participent aux communautés économiques régionales. Mais aller trouver au développement de ces îles dans chacune des CER, c'est pas facile d'en trouver. Ça, c'est un autre problème. Deuxième chose, c'est que les îles, il y en a à peu près 52 États insulaires dans le monde, dont 6 en Afrique. Sur les 6 en Afrique, il y a 3 en Afrique de l'Ouest et en Afrique centrale, si on veut le classer ainsi. Et les autres, les 4 autres, sont dans l'océan Indien. Dans l'océan Indien, ils ont essayé depuis les années 80 de mettre en place une communauté de coopération régionale, ce qu'on appelle la Commission des îles de l'océan Indien. Cette commission, de par le nom, est une structure dont l'existence est conditionnée par une aide budgétaire de l'Union européenne qui assure le fonctionnement de cette organisation et qui manque à la fois d'ambition, il n'y a pas une bonne stratégie et des orientations claires et des objectifs clairs au niveau à la fois du fonctionnement de cette commission et que de leur appartenance au continent africain. Alors, c'est pour cela que je vais vous en parler. Pourquoi cette situation? D'abord, les îles, on connaît les îles africaines, la plus petite étant les Seychelles, mais c'est un État qui est composé de 115 îles. Et la plus grande étant Guinée-Bissau, c'est 80 îles. Mais 80 îles pour le relier, ou 115 îles pour les relier, avoir une unité nationale, un territoire commun, où on peut se déplacer, où on peut assurer l'éducation et la santé, où on peut faire des infrastructures et développer l'économie locale, c'est pas facile. Deuxième chose, c'est que ces îles sont assez minuscules. Moi, je viens des Comores. La plus grande des îles fait 80 km de long sur 40 km de large. Ça, c'est la plus grande. N'en parlons pas des plus petites. Il y en a qui font 30 km. Il y en a qui font peut-être 50 km. Alors, mais qu'est-ce qui différencie des autres pays? C'est la forte pression démographique. Dans la plupart de ces îles, nous avons une densité au kilomètre carré qui dépasse souvent les 500 habitants au kilomètre carré. Ça, c'est un élément important. D'où un problème à la fois au niveau éducation, au niveau santé, au niveau valorisation des ressources humaines. Deuxième problème qui se pose, c'est que la plupart de ces îles ne disposent pas des infrastructures de base nécessaires le permettant de se relier au continent. Manque de ports, manque d'aéroports, manque de politique de développement des transports aériens ou de transports maritimes, et ce qui fait qu'ils sont toujours reliés à l'ancienne puissance coloniale. Ça, c'est le défi. Alors, deuxième défi de ces îles, c'est un problème climatologique et d'environnement. On est en face, vous vous rappelez très bien, il y a à peu près une dizaine d'années, le tsunami, mais les vagues sont arrivées jusqu'à l'océan Indien et jusqu'à l'Afrique de l'Est. Et ce sont ces îles qui ont été les victimes. Alors, le problème, c'est que dans ces îles, il y a très peu d'industrie, il y a très peu de pollution, mais eux, ils subissent les conséquences des bouleversements au niveau climatologique. Là, il y a un autre problème qui se pose, c'est que ces îles sont composées d'un multipote au niveau de la population. Pour le cas de mon pays, c'est des populations asiatiques mélangées avec des populations africaines et européennes. Alors, le problème, c'est que c'est la structure du fonctionnement de la société qui est un problème important. Donc, le poids, l'équilibre politique devient toujours difficile à retrouver. Devant ces différentes contraintes, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? C'est des États vraiment très vulnérables et qu'il faudra tout faire pour essayer à la fois de le relier à l'économie africaine et en même temps leur permettre aussi de se développer rapidement. D'où la stratégie qu'on peut proposer et qui a fait de bons résultats, aussi bien à l'île Maurice qu'au Cap-Vert. C'est essayer d'avoir une stratégie qui réduit la vulnérabilité liée au climat, liée à l'insularité, liée à la forte pression démographique, pour développer des chaînes de valeur qui permettent de valoriser, développer une industrie locale. Deux, c'est avoir des institutions plus stables. Et ce n'est pas le cas de Madagascar ni des Comores, qui connaissent à la fois des bouleversements politiques et qui créent l'instabilité, et qui a fait aussi la stabilité politique l'atout majeur du développement de l'île Maurice. Mais c'est aussi mettre en place une nouvelle politique capable de valoriser les atouts, surtout l'économie bleue qui existe dans ces pays, et de se rapprocher davantage des communautés économiques régionales limitrophes auxquelles ils appartiennent. C'est renforcer aussi le transport entre ces îles, mais c'est aussi permettre à ces îles de mieux disposer d'une industrie de transformation, parce que ces îles ont été longtemps, au niveau de la colonisation, connu un développement industriel lié à la canne de sucre ou à toutes les plantes à parfum, mais qui n'ont jamais été valorisées sur place. Voilà, je ne veux pas, compte tenu du temps limité qui m'est dévolu, je ne veux pas développer. Je vous attends par vos questions pour pouvoir vous apporter les éléments complémentaires nécessaires. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Sorry for the time constraint there. Sir.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. But I'll speak in English from here on. I first of all want to thank Steve for the invitation to speak this morning. I will find a suitable way to repay that compliment, possibly at the board next time. I also want to thank the team for a superb report, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading over the weekend, and I do think it's an excellent knowledge product, one that the bank can be proud of, and one that I encourage everybody to become an advocate for, a very, very important issue, but also to become advisors, both in headquarters and in the field offices. I can see we've got a lot of attendance there, which is great. You've asked me to talk about a few issues. I just wanted to open up one thing that struck me reading the report is in the number and the complexity of the regional economic communities and the regional integration policies. There's a graph in there, a little table on page 16 if you want to check it in the English version, which just shows the sheer complexity of the different arrangements, inter-country arrangements. And I think all of these institutions have their own capacity issues, have their own funding issues, they're responding to different political mandates. A lot of them are having serious funding shortfalls and having to go outside to external donors. So one thing that struck me was a need for rationalisation of the number of agreements and of regional economic communities. I saw that Côte d'Ivoire is actually a member of 5 different communities, And I imagine there's overlap and duplication within those. Anyway, on to the, Steve, you've asked me to make a few remarks, first of all on migration. That's probably the easy one because I think nearly everybody in this room has just migrated. We've all experienced moving from one end of Africa to the other, so I'm preaching to the converted here. But we know that the media is often criticised for talking about Africa as a country and not as a continent. But I have to say on this issue, I would like to see Africa operating more or behaving more as one country in terms of the ability of people to move across borders. It is a very divided continent in that regard. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done both at the political, at the national parliamentary level, but at the regional level as well to address that. You asked me to reflect on some experiences from the EU, but if you also look at the US and China, they have received a massive growth dividend from the ability to move labour around quickly, responding to different needs, different skills. The EU as well has achieved that, not without some controversy in my own UK constituency, but it has had a huge impact both for the sending countries and for the recipient countries. And while there may be political and social issues to manage, the figures consistently demonstrate that there are clear economic benefits to migration and to the free movement of labour. And at the moment, my feeling is that Africa is losing out on that possibility. What the report made clear is that the wealthier can and do migrate in and out of Africa. But as we've all experienced, anybody who came from Tunisia, we've all experienced, even when you get a relocation package, it is still not easy. It remains expensive and a challenge and bureaucratic. And that's no criticism at all of Côte d'Ivoire or Tunisia. I think this is typical across the continent. But so, this is about inclusive growth. So we need to not just look at what happens to the wealthy, we need to look at how the poor do this and how the poorest in the continent, those who have no funds, they have no relocation package, they have no protection, they have no employment rights when they're moving. They're often exploited, picked up by traffickers. And if you think about how difficult it is to move informally between one country to another, imagine how difficult that is for women, who then are subject to potentially sexual exploitation. It's very, very difficult for women to move. I thought the report could have gone further. I appreciate there was a constraint, but I think there is more work to do to really understand the gender dimensions and the full inclusivity challenges on migration. In terms of lessons to be learned, I think there are lessons to be learned. If you look at the EU, we have a single authority, something which the UK isn't always happy about, which has where we've ceded some national powers. But what that has done is set the rules of the game. It has set the rules of the game for the entire European continent. So everybody knows and everybody is free to move around. And this requires, as we know, as I know in my own country, it requires a sustained political effort to maintain that support, but it does deliver dividends. I just want to make a few comments on free capital of movement as well, which is the other issue you asked me to talk about. Like migration, we know that free capital flows, the freedom of movement, can have substantial benefits for countries, including enhancing efficiency, promoting financial sector competitiveness, increasing productive investment, and managing consumption. But we also know that the free movement of capital is not without risk, and these can be magnified by gaps in the country's own financial and institutional infrastructure. So there is a need here to harmonise and to ensure that this can happen without undue obstacles. Free movement of capital needs to be well planned, timed and sequenced in order to ensure that its benefits outweigh the costs. And as well as a strong political commitment to do this, this does require a stronger financial infrastructure, which the bank's own financial sector development and other development partners, World Bank and IFC and others, are trying to implement across the continent, as well obviously as the continent's own regional economic communities. So I'm going to be brief. I stuck to my 4 minutes, so you don't need to give me the 1 minute card. I can see holding up there. I think we have a long way to go on these issues. This report is great. It captures where we are. But when you look at the challenge of the different number of agreements, the challenge of migration, the obstacles to capital flows, then if we are going to unleash the full potential of the whole African continent for every African, not just for the wealthiest who can afford to take advantage of it, then we as a bank need to do a lot more work. I hope that this bank can become the champion for inclusive growth. We say it, we've got it in all of our strategies, but are we seeing it in our come to life in our investments and our policies? I think not yet to the extent that we'd like to see it, because nobody else will champion them. Nobody else will champion the excluded and the marginalised on the continent. But this bank has a very important role to play and to become the champion for all Africans on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the invitation to come and share with you a few thoughts on this matter. I'll talk very briefly about, not directly on the detailed contents of the report, but just a few words about progress on regional integration, some of the challenges, and a few words about what we need to do going forward. First, I think it's very clear that while we are frustrated about the slow progress, but I think it's clear from history that the issue of regional integration is a difficult and complex matter and requires consistent and long-term efforts. In the light of that, I think it's reasonable to say that some progress has been made at the level of political commitments, the various declarations, Lagos, Abuja, Accra, Addis, and so on. And there is also clear progress in the sense that the regional economic communities, I think, in general, we've seen some improvement in terms of their capacity to facilitate regional integration, in terms of some improvement in skills and some improvement in implementation capacity. They're still very far away from where they need to be, but I think they've progressed significantly as compared to what they were 10 years ago. The other area is also at the level of programming. I think if you follow the PIDA Priority Action Plan, there has been some progress in trying to translate some of the broad political commitments and treaties into specific actions. The PIDA Priority Action Plan and NEPAD contribution has developed, if you like, I think 51 programs broken down into 433 projects covering the whole of the region. And so there is a blueprint, there are clear plans, for implementation, which is progress. And at the level of trade, without seeking to repeat some of the information that you've had, I think there has been about a 5-fold increase in the value of trade within Africa. It's currently around about 130 billion, which is a 5-fold increase as compared to about a decade ago. There has also been a significant progress as far as foreign direct investment is concerned within the regions. The information we have says that there has been an increase of something like within, especially the East African community, from about from about 2% to 14% of trade is done within the region. In the case of SADC, there has been an increase from 4 to 10%, and as for COMESA, from 1 to 8%, all within the last decade. So this is significant. Of course, we have to realize that nevertheless, intra-African trade, or rather African trade, contributes only about 3.1% of global trade. So we're still very low down. But I just want to underline that some progress has been achieved. Now, there has also been significant growth in terms of physical infrastructure, roads, some railways, power, as well as ICTs. Some progress has been made, and I think the bank, the African Development Bank, has made some significant contribution in that area, which I would not seek to repeat because others have mentioned it already. Lastly, I think there has been also enormous progress in terms of cross-regional banking, in the sense that there are quite a few banking corporations that are operating outside their countries of origin in Africa. I think EcoBank is one of the most well-known, but also many of the banks from South Africa, Nigeria, now Kenya, and so on. So I think there is some progress as far as that is concerned. Now, some of the challenges, there are many, so I'll restrict myself to just mentioning a few. Firstly, as I said, there has been some progress in physical infrastructure. And you know, physical infrastructure is extremely important. I think the estimate is that for every 1 billion of investment in physical infrastructure, you create about between 26,000 and 110,000 jobs, depending on the nature of the infrastructure, with the road infrastructure, I think, being the most effective when it comes to creating jobs. So it is extremely important. Yet, despite the progress we've made in this area, you find that the roads, when it comes to the soft dimensions of this infrastructure, we still have a tremendous amount of work to go. And I'll just give a very small example. I think Janvier is here. We visited the Nigeria-Cameroon highway with him some time ago. Substantial progress as far as the road in the Nigerian side and also from the Cameroonian side. But in the middle, where there is supposed to be a border post, maybe one border post, what you have there is simply grassland and some rocks. And while, of course, pedestrians and traders are busy using these roads within their national boundaries, the cross-border effect was nowhere to be seen at that point in time, and it will not be seen until you are able to establish these border posts and facilitate the movement of people and goods and investment across. There we have much more work to do, both at the level of the region, the continent, as well as for the African Development Bank itself. And what I will do is, for the second challenge, I'm going to give you a few statistics. I don't know whether, how many of you have looked at the SEALS report, which was done in July 2014, just about 6 months ago. Maybe a bit of boring statistics, but for me it is extremely important because it illustrates some of the major challenges that we have to confront, which are not often addressed. When we talk about non-tariff barriers and other things, we talk about them in broad terms. But let me break down to you and bring to you the reality of what this means in concrete terms. You take the information they've provided. This is SEALS. I think it's partly supported also by USAID. We appreciate that. They have given some examples that the road from Bouaké through Burkina Faso to Niamey, a road of 1,371 kilometers, has about 38 checkpoints. That is the average of a checkpoint every 36 kilometers. Ouagadougou to Accra, 1,004 kilometers, 62 checkpoints. Each 16 kilometers on average, there is a checkpoint. Parakou in Benin to Niamey, 605 kilometers, an average of a checkpoint every 31 kilometers. Similar figures for Burkina Faso to Benin, Mali, Senegal, Guinea, and so on. I don't have the time to give you all the information, but the point is that these are checkpoints mainly affecting the transportation through trucks of grains, of livestock. Okay? And here, it's not just checking, but the illegal payments involved to customs and other officials on these roads range from $8 per 100 kilometers in Burkina Faso to $169 each 100 kilometers in Senegal. As for rice, per boiled rice, the average is 403 US dollars each 100 kilometers. And the information says that there are average delays of 120 minutes for trucks every 100 kilometers. Multiply and see how much that is involved. Overall, it means what? The cost of illegal payments on these routes constitutes 1/3 of total production cost. Now, if you are talking about regional value chains, if you are looking at transforming primary commodities into manufacture and value addition, you cannot do it effectively unless you deal with these problems, regardless of the roads that you've built and regardless of the other infrastructure you have. If you don't deal with these soft issues, you are still substantially retarding the capacity to get the results out of the physical infrastructure that you have constructed. Now, this is the reality on the ground. Now, there are also other challenges. For instance, we need to maintain the infrastructure we have built. I'll be finishing in a minute, Steve. We need to maintain, we are developing a lot of infrastructure. But this infrastructure has to be maintained. Otherwise, a few years down the line, we'll still be coming back to the regional institutions and to the donor organizations and looking for money to simply rebuild roads that have been destroyed within a very short period of time because they've not been adequately maintained. How do you maintain them? A large part has to depend on recovering the costs through whatever it is, whether it's a road tax, whether it's a petroleum tax, or whether it's some kind of tolling the roads. But if you are going to rely, if you say that the reality is that governments will not be able to shoulder the responsibility of maintaining all these roads, and if you are going to rely on people to pay for the use of these roads, this is the way to go. But remember, we have limits, and that's why I call it a challenge. What is that limit? When you ask people to pay for these kinds of services and to maintain the roads in more industrialized countries, as compared to what you do in Africa, the challenges are not the same. A simple example, the per capita income of even Portugal, despite the problems it's been facing, is 38 times that of Burundi, 18 times that of Ethiopia, and 15 times that of Uganda. And therefore, the capacity to pay for these services, and it's probably going to cost more for making this service in Africa as compared to in Europe, and yet the capacity to pay is much, much lower in Africa. So these are the kind of contradictions and challenges that we have to confront if we are to make this maintenance a success. And yet we must. Then I think it's also a challenge, and I'll try to stop here because I've taken too much time, is to try to make the expansion in financial services as inclusive as possible. Right now, there has been a significant expansion in financial services in banks to other regions, as I've told you. However, most of these banks concentrate only in providing financial services to large-scale clients and engaging in foreign currency transactions. Most of them have very little in terms of lending to the small-scale, lower-level, poverty-reducing segments of the population. I can see that, I hope that the discussion we had with Attijara Wafa Bank yesterday means that we'll be able to make a change in that direction. But at the moment, this is the reality, to make these financial expansions in a way that is inclusive and that lowers poverty rather than increase concentration of wealth. Having said that, I will say that I will restrict the way forward now, since I don't have time, to only one factor, and that factor is governance. The reality is that all these things we've said, we need to develop the right commitment and make our regimes democratic and responsive and committed to the progress of the countries in which they are. Regional integration and growth is important for Africa for its economic, social, and political transformation. That is absolutely clear. We have to have systems and leadership that actually practice that, not just as rhetoric, but in reality. As long as they respond to the democratic needs of their people, then the right steps will be taken to build the institutions and to do what is necessary to take it forward, not just at the national level, but at the regional level, because the two factors are highly correlated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Idi Yahaya. I put in a small Dean premium towards the end there. Thank you so much. This was, by the way, why don't we give the panelists one more round of applause, gentlemen. I think they've done a fantastic job indeed. Now I saw some bit of movement here. I don't quite know if the president is on his way. But what we want to do now, very briefly, we are slightly over the time, and will be advised accordingly by Joel here. But what we want to do is open it up a little bit. But before we do so, I'll tell you that I had previously wanted to make this a little more gender-balanced panel. And so I had asked Madame Marlene Kanga and she was very enthusiastic, accepted that she would be part of this. But then she was unfortunately called to go on and discuss. You're very welcome, Mr. President, and discuss and go on mission. But actually, the mission was cancelled, and so she's up there. I can see. Do you want to have your 2 minutes of? You want to comment at all about what we had said about the Central African situation and of course the difficulty of regional integration in that part of Africa?
Je pense que tout ce qui a été dit sur les défis de l'intégration régionale sont particulièrement sévères en Afrique centrale. J'étais frappée par le tableau indiquant les problèmes relatifs aux visas et donc effectivement à la circulation des personnes. Et l'Afrique centrale est une des régions, et la région du continent où nous avons le plus de difficultés de mobilité entre les personnes, qui résultent effectivement dans les régulations, mais également aussi dans les problèmes d'infrastructure, dans ce qui vient d'être dit sur les tarifs ou les obstacles non tarifaires, et donc réellement également sur les capacités des économies régionales, des communautés économiques régionales à accompagner cette intégration. Donc réellement tout ce qui vient d'être dit est de façon très accrue, nous le vivons en Afrique centrale. Et donc je pense que la banque a énormément un rôle extrêmement important à jouer. Nous sommes en train de développer effectivement, d'accompagner ces pays sur les infrastructures physiques. Nous accompagnons également au niveau de la facilitation de transport. Mais ce qui vient d'être dit surtout, c'est sur la volonté politique des pays à effectivement aller dans ce sens-là. Et je pense que ça, c'est une question fondamentale sur laquelle nous devons travailler encore plus en dialogue avec ces pays, ces communautés économiques régionales qui ont une très faible capacité, mais également la volonté politique des pays vraiment d'aller vers l'intégration. Donc nous avons vraiment un dialogue important à jouer là-dessus, et c'est ce que je voulais indiquer pour la région centre. Merci.
Okay, thank you so much indeed. Okay, so Joel, I'm completely under your instructions from here on. Yeah.
Well, the president is here, so.
Okay, so
colleagues, colleagues here in the room, and of course in the field offices, many of you who have sort of tuned in. I hope you found that an illuminating discussion with the EDs, of course, and our colleague, the acting director. And usually, you know, there are many people, when they look at a menu, they look first at the dessert before actually looking at the main course. So in this case, we now have the dessert with the, you know, which for many you're just working your way towards the really nice bits. So I'm not saying that the EDs were not the nice bits. That would not be appropriate, but I'm just saying that I think it's time to have the president of the African Development Bank, who will now make his closing remarks. Mr. President. The nice bit.
Good morning. No, I never mind about that. I, as a true African, I look for the main meal. So I'm sorry I missed it, but thanks nonetheless. You know, the African Development Bank was created fundamentally for this. Go back to the notes of the first meeting in Khartoum. This is the raison d'etre of this institution. Now, whether we have done our part, that particular mission is for the evaluators. I say this because I'm always impressed at how events like this are poorly attended. Is it because we don't do enough mobilization for people to come? Is it because people don't think this is important? So that's for you, Steve. I would have thought every staff of this institution, whatever they are, would consider this such a major event for what they do, that they will be here or following. Because this is why we were created. Of course, we were created to do bridges here and there, to do farming projects, education projects, but fundamentally, this is why we were created. That should not be forgotten by anyone who works for the African Development Bank. Now, this issue of regional integration, or the single market, as I like to call it, is subject of so many seminars. Actually, I've stopped counting how many events I've attended or even organized. But I'm also impressed by the truly slow progress, even where we can make faster progress. Just an example for you before I show you a couple of pictures. I want to see an African leader now pass it on, and as Africans, we don't talk badly of the people who have gone on in North Africa. And the reason was that the country next door wanted to import gas from that particular country. So I spoke to the leader. I said, we're prepared to finance this, but we need agreements on your side. It looked so obvious to me. They have gas, there's a market for it, all you need is a pipeline in between. The leader said, yes, fine, you can talk to my officials, which I did. I went back to this other country, and I was very encouraged. The next thing I hear, the other country is not building a pipeline to the next door. It's thinking of a pipeline to Italy. So they had made their choice of where they belong. Another country, I speak to the head of state. Why don't you open the borders with the neighborhood? He said, President, no. You know, we're a very small country, less than 2 million people. If you open these borders, there are too many Nigerians, Cameroonians, Senegalese that are coming in. I'll go back to my hotel, but who are the people running the hotel? Brazilians, the Turkish, and many other nationalities. So you can talk about this thing, analyze it, do your econometrics. Fundamentally, it's an issue of political will to have it done. And I think that maybe the African Development Bank, we need to begin to turn around the question asked, what is it that makes people so afraid to open up the borders? Then once we have walked through that particular angle, try to address those fears. Are they real or are they imagined? Now, take the case of my country. We're a very tiny place. We're 10% of Ivory Coast in size. We're 26,000 square kilometers. Is that right? Yes. Here, I think there are more than 260,000 square kilometers. We're 11 million people. You know, work on each other. As a Rwandan, when I see empty space, I get surprised. Except the national parks or gazetted places. But the government, like the Seychelles and Mauritius, took a decision that every African who turns up at the airport is welcome. They're given a visa, they can stay there. And now they haven't taken another decision to allow Africans to come and sit and work. But we're 11 million people in such a tiny place. But who is the beneficiary? We. Kenyan teachers, Ugandan doctors, Congolese engineers, Nigerian accountants, Ghanaian doctors. Everybody is a winner. So I think the approach we must now take, Steve, is not further analysis. We can analyze this thing to death. It is to figure out why is it that people fear opening the borders, and then address that issue. Could be for those who fear immigration. We can use maybe some digital solutions. Is that right? For those who have security issues, we can work with securocrats to figure out how to address the issues. But it's not because people do not understand the benefits of integration. There's some inbuilt fears we have to address. But the Europeans have the same problem. You know, Europeans fought many wars, but at some point they figured out that we have to work together. So, from the Steel Union with gold, the Treaty of Rome, or the Lisbon Treaty, they have figured out how to resolve issues. But they still have matters around immigration among themselves. This was some did not sign the Schengen Agreement. They have not resolved them. But there's one thing they have done, which I always tell people, and last time I met the Honorary Department, I showed them. That was the project of the Airbus, which McKinsey did for us. It's available for all of you to see. Europe had very small aircraft manufacturing companies, British Aerospace, Saab, Fokker, many others, small. They could not compete with Boeing or McDonnell Douglas, never. But they decided, if we're going to compete, we need to have something which can compete with Boeing. So they came together. They created this beautiful project, the Airbus. Now, in my ignorance, I used to think that the Airbus was made in Toulouse. Truth be told, the Airbus is made everywhere in Europe. Every country, even Latvia, makes a bit of the Airbus. The wing, the fuselage, the undercarriage, aviation, everything. So every European country has a stake in the Airbus. And then the infrastructure they did around the Airbus to ensure that all these things get to Toulouse was built around this one project. So could be that maybe what we need is to figure out something which can bring us together, where everybody, large and small, is a winner. And I want to urge you to look at this study, which is done by McKinsey, by Nkosana Moyo and Acheleke. So if you could circulate this, people to see where self-interest can actually generate collective interest. Now, I mean, you still have my pictures, where are they? Take a look at that thing. Do you recognize this man? Those of you recognize him, put your hand up. Please take a look at him. He happens to be a friend of mine. I don't have his money, but one day I can get there when I leave the ADB. Just imagine that even him, to travel across Africa, he has to go to get a visa. And yet he's going to invest He invests 14 African countries in cement and sugar and everything. But just imagine that an American, a British, can actually circulate in Africa without requiring visas, but he needs a visa. Is this a problem of infrastructure? Is this a problem of security? Is he dangerous? So what is it? Why can people give him actually a visa even before he requires one? So that is the issue of it. This is not about infrastructure. It's about people determining this is important for the single market. Now, I made a proposal to the African Union that, like we have our passport here, the African Union should have a passport. And that passport should be available to every government in Africa. Let them decide who to give it. And I hope they'll discuss it, I think, in January or sometime next year. We should pursue that. It does not require money. It requires a decision. So I'm visually challenging now. Show me the next one. Take a look at those two. Just take a careful look. No, I mean the first one. This one is missing. This one. Yes, okay, very fine. Okay, take a look at this one. This one we can resolve. We don't have a lot of money, but we can find money to build these things. We're building tons of them all the time. In fact, when I came in the bank, I had made a mental decision that before I leave the bank, we're going to try and join up as many countries as possible, that every country should be joined to the next door, next country. We have done so far, except the Mano River area where there were some issues. But many other countries are now being connected. The latest between Gabon and the Congo. I think now we'll be working between Cote d'Ivoire and Liberia, the south, and a couple of others I can't recall. So that we can do something. Subject to the environmental studies, which Lisa Morris will ensure that you follow. But this is what we cannot resolve. Take a look at that. Here, is this a problem with infrastructure? So what is it? How many African borders do you visit? So the highway is there, so fine. But this is what we see. Now this was a Kazungula Bridge, which is not yet built, it's being built. Although our procurement rules made it difficult for us, oh God, I mean. Is it being done? But I asked the driver here how long it took him to wait. Now he says he waits for 2 weeks sitting in his truck. Well, there's an old pontoon which is 50 years old. So that's a physical problem. But even once the bridge is built, I'm not sure they'll be there for one day to cross. There'll be papers to fill, securocrats, immigration, phytosanitary, who are the others? All kinds of officials who are so important. This, according to me, is what the African Development Bank should now focus on full-time, the non-tariff restrictions. Because it's such a waste of efforts to build highways and people are waiting for a week. So I've asked people in ONRE to figure out what we can do differently now on the issue of non-tariff restrictions. Border by border, what is the issue? I visited one, and then I'll stop there, where we built highways and a single border post. And when I visited, I found that there was a truck with cows. These are Frisian cows. As a cattle keeper, I know about these cows. These are very delicate animals. They were packed in their truck, waiting in the sun to cross the border. So I asked, because this is supposed to be a single border post. They said, oh, the veterinary officer, we cannot trace him. But I said, does he not have a phone number? Or we're calling his phone, it is not answering. Okay, I said, well, look, I'm still here, but I'm not leaving until these cows have gone. So Within about 10 minutes, by some miracle, the truck was moving. I don't think it's because the veterinary officer came. Somebody made it his decision to make sure that the animals cross the border. So even when you have a highway, a single border post, there'll still be non-tariff restrictions of some kind. And this is what I think we should address. There's something else. Okay, this is my last one. And this is my favorite. These are the organizations, often underfunded, which are there to promote economic integration in Africa. You can count. People have spoken of rationalization. I've been hearing this for the last 50 years. But is this the best way to promote economic integration? By creating organizations. Every African country belongs to more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, underfunded often. And all they do is produce resolutions, which are then put in the placard. So it could be that instead of pursuing the spaghetti ball, as they call it, maybe time has come to pursue the Airbus type project. I'm not saying Airbus type project, where everybody finds they have an interest in coming together. Otherwise, frankly, as you see China now doing, trying to promote the domestic market, because the export model has got its own limitations. This is what it will take for us to develop the domestic market. The kind of things I've just shown you. So my final comment, Steve, I think all these things, I'm sure you did a fantastic analysis today, but we now need to go beyond the analytics. We'll see together as a bank and say, this is what we are created. What is it that we can do differently? So there goes your dessert, if you call it one. But whatever it is, thank you.
Thank you very much, President, for those remarks. I just want to, have you ever noticed how things get done if the President is standing nearby? You know, it's quite amazing that through that border, things were able to move, you see. So if only we could sort of clone him so that a number of those things could then move, maybe we'd have a better Africa. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we now come to the close of this morning's function for this important document. As I said, it is Christmas reading for all of us, and hopefully we can then ask the tough questions of Steve, and also the challenge the President has set about actually moving the agenda on, rather than just having the documents, but then saying, where do we go from here? What do we do about that spaghetti bowl? So thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.